So this is a short by Osamu Tezuka in the early 60s, I believe 1964. I might be wrong about that. This is a cool short because I think what I like about Osamu Tezuka, whether through his Astro Boy and various other things, but this mermaid short, what I like about it is it's at first starts in this total fantasy world, and I think that is really interesting because you just see this guy and he's playing with a fish and he's having a nice time with this fish, and then he believes this fish is a mermaid, and you think the fish is turned into a mermaid, and they have this nice time on the beach, and you just think it's sort of like a simple short when you're watching it. It's like this dude hangs out with a mermaid, that's cool, and there are these stick figures that you can see the backgrounds through. It's sort of like Osamu Tezuka's take on UPA, which would use kind of stranger backgrounds at the time, but he makes it sort of even more surreal, and like I'd say it's like if Don Hertzfeldt met UPA, but Osamu Tezuka never watched any Don Hertzfeldt because he died and stuff, but it does have this kind of interesting kind of simplistic design to it, and it feels like it's made in a real beautiful sense, the whole thing. I really like the design, but he brings this fish and he thinks it's, or this mermaid, and it's revealed it's just his imagination, and I believe it's his parents are really upset by this, and people are trying to convince him that it's not a mermaid, that it's just a fish. And basically, Osamu Tezuka, and what I keep reading, and I couldn't find too much about how it was released in Japan and things like that. This is about how society shuns free thinking. And I definitely agree with that. I think this is pushing this moral. I also kind of felt like there was possibly a influence on The Shape of Water from this, possibly, because of that was so much about free thinking and involved a mermaid. I couldn't find if that was an influence, but I wouldn't put it past Guillermo del Toro. But the idea of free thinking and a society shunning it in a totalitarian society where outside thinking is completely forbidden, regardless of the joy it brings this person. I also thought, is this guy fucking a fish? Because if so, that's gross. But in the same point, I don't think he was. I also thought, was the Lighthouse influenced by this as well? Or Ponyo. Actually, the Ponyo thing might actually be correct, Austin. That's a good point. That it was this an influence on Ponyo, possibly. I could see that because it's a boy who has a fish in water and then a mermaid comes out. I could see, I mean, there's no way Hayao Miyazaki saw this short. It is supposed to show this kind of like, this very rigidly conservative structure that's haunting and hurting this more creative, kind of free thinking guy who kind of let his imagination go wild. That's basically, regardless of his weird relationship with this fish, but I think that's mainly what's interesting about it, because you kind of get the fantasy first. You get this fantasy at the beginning of Mermaid, and you get like how he had a good time with her, and even though she has big boobs and stuff like that, you get obviously sexualized. You get that he had, you know, this amazing experience with her, but then you understand when they take down the fantasy, how hurtful that is. And although, you know, what the fantasy was might be weird, and you might be able to read into that and things like that, I think when Osamu Tezuka is really pushing a moral, much like he did with when I watched Baggy recently, both in my review and for Saber's video, I noticed that he really has a really strong moral center to each of his tales, and I think this one is more simplistic in that you understand that free thinking and imagination can be halted by a certain amount of people and not be as free as you would want it to be, and how much that hurts to not have that fantasy, how the beautiful ideas that the mind can create, and how kind of more stilted and hurtful thinking can sink that down and not let that exist, and how heartbreaking that can be. And I think by showing that fantasy, he illustrated that point very well. Mermaid is a great short. Please check it out. I think it is. I don't know how influential it is, and I'm maybe pointing out things that just have guys with fish and stuff in it, but I still think it's a wonderfully beautiful, kind of surreal, interesting short, and it shows like how much he was able to play with the medium, because this is very loose, it's very different, it's very arty, has a real sense of clarity to the whole short, and it shows like most of his stuff I see, like the framing and how well it's told visually is just very impressive, and I totally saw that in Mermaid, and I'm really glad I saw it, so thank you for suggesting it, and I highly recommend yet another thing from Osamu Tezuka, probably one of the greatest animators of all time, and I think this holds up and shows how experimental he could possibly be while telling a fairly accessible and universal kind of a story like he did in Mermaid. This next one, Mermaid, was suggested by Akishin, I think.